The frost came early that year, and it took the low road first, then the well, then the wash-house, until Aldermore smelled of nothing but wood smoke and wet wool, and the flat cold of standing water that has decided not to move again until spring. Nell Coverdale walked that road before light, when the smoke was still thin and grey overhead, and she was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. Not pretty, not plain enough to pity either, just a woman with red knuckles and a basket of another woman's linen, going where she was needed because the woman who was usually needed had gone to bed with a fever 3 days running and had not got up since. She was 25. She had been mending things since she was 7, which was the year her father stopped being able to, and she had got so quiet and so exact about it that the vicar's wife once said Nell Coverdale could sew a hem so fine you would swear the cloth had never been cut at all. It was not a gift anyone paid for. It was the only thing Nell had that nobody could take from her, because nobody wanted it badly enough to try. Her mother, Grace, had scrubbed and starched and pressed for Calder Hall for 11 years. It was not grand work. It was work that ruined the hands, and bent the back, and paid just enough to keep a roof from becoming a memory. When the fever took Grace to her bed, it did not ask whether the Hall could do without a laundress for a fortnight. Households like Calder Hall did not stop needing clean linen because a woman's chest rattled when she breathed. So Nell put on her mother's apron, because it was that or lose the position altogether, and walked the frozen road in the dark to do work that was not, strictly, hers to do. She told herself it would only be until her mother was well. She told herself this the way a person tells themselves anything they need to believe before dawn. The hall stood at the top of the rise the way it always had, grey stone going up out of grey mist, and by the time Nell reached the yard her fingers had stopped answering her properly. She did not complain of it. She had long ago decided that complaining was a luxury for people whose complaints changed something. What she did not know, going in through the scullery door that first morning with her mother's basket on her hip, was that before the week was out somebody in that house would go without gloves who had never once had to ask why, and somebody else would give up his own without being asked, and that the giving would be seen by exactly one person who was not supposed to be watching at all. The wash-house was cold enough to hurt. Nell built the fire under the copper first, because a laundress who let the water go tepid was a laundress who did twice the work for half the result, and she had learned that from her mother the way she had learned everything, by standing close and saying nothing, and watching hands. While the water heated, she went looking for the boot room, because someone had to see to the boots before the family came down, and the someone, this week, was her. The boot room was where she found the boy. He was called Tam Bewley, and he was perhaps 10, and he did the boots, and swept the passage, and carried what he was told to carry, and he had a limp that had come from a wagon 2 winters back, the same wagon that had taken his father and not brought him home. He was sitting on the cold flags, with one boot half blacked, and his hand wrapped in a rag gone through with red, and he was not crying. He had the look of a child who had learned, the same as Nell had learned, that crying changed nothing and cost something. "You've cut yourself," Nell said, which was not a question, because it plainly did not need to be one. Tam did not answer straight away. He looked at the door instead, the way a child looks at a door when he is more afraid of who might come through it than of the cut itself. "Mister, Grick says I'm slow," he said finally. "Said if I break another glass I can find my dinner elsewhere." Nell did not ask whether that was true, because she could see the broken glass swept into the corner, and she could see the boy's hand, and she did not need a third piece of evidence to know which of those two things in the room deserved her attention. She knelt on the cold flags in her mother's apron, which she could not afford to ruin, and she did not think about that either. She was going to lose good time this morning. The linens would be late. Someone might ask why. She weighed all of it in the time it took to unwind the rag, and none of it weighed more than the cut. She had nothing with her but her own handkerchief, plain linen, no lace, the one good thing she owned, and she used it without a second thought, because a wound left open in this cold would fester before dinner. She bound it tight and even, the same stitch of care she gave a torn hem, and when she was done she took off her own shawl, the wool one her mother had knitted her 2 winters back, and put it round the boy's shoulders, because his own coat was thin as a letter, and the boot-room had no fire in it at all. "I can't take your shawl," Tam said. "You can and you will," Nell said, "or I shall have to carry it home again and explain to my mother why I brought it back with a hole where your need went through it. Wear it till you're warm. That is all I am asking." She did not tell him to keep it a secret. She did not think of it as a kindness that wanted witnesses, because it had not occurred to her that anyone was there to witness it. The yard outside was still dark, the window fogged with the cold, and she believed, the way a person believes the small true things they never examine, that she and the boy were entirely alone. She was wrong about that, though she would not learn how wrong for some time yet. A man stood at the far side of the stable yard, in a groundskeeper's coat gone soft at the elbows, with a lantern turned low so it would not carry across the cobbles. He had come out at that hour, as he often did, to look at a fence line the steward swore was mended, and which he did not entirely believe was mended, because he had learned the hard way that men tell a duke what a duke wishes to hear, and tell each other the truth. He had not meant to see anything at all in the boot-room window. He had simply been passing, lantern low, coat collar up, a man nobody in that yard would have looked at twice, and through the fogged glass he had seen a woman with a basket on her hip kneel down on a stone floor, in a good apron she plainly could not spare, and give a rag from her own body to a boy's bleeding hand, and then take the shawl off her own back without being asked, and without being seen, or so she believed. She did not know then that the man at the window was not what his coat said he was. She did not know that the lantern he carried lit a face that half the county would have recognised on sight, had they been awake at that hour, had they been standing where only a groundskeeper stands. She did not know that he stood a long moment after she had gone back to her copper and her linens, simply looking at the space where the kindness had been, the way a man looks at a thing he has been waiting a long time to see, and had begun to think did not exist. She only knew that her handkerchief was ruined, her shawl was gone, and the water was hot enough now for the wash. Grace Coverdale's fever broke on the 4th night, and came back worse on the 5th, and by the time the physician from Aldermore had come and gone twice, taking what coin there was, and leaving instructions Nell could not afford to follow to the letter, the household above stairs had already begun to notice the new laundress in the yard before light. Nobody thanked her for the shawl. Nell had not expected thanks, and would have been embarrassed to receive it, the same way she was embarrassed 3 days later, when Mrs. Pruitt, the housekeeper, found her in the passage, and pressed a shilling into her palm, without a word of explanation. "I don't know what this is for," Nell said, trying to give it back. "For the boy's hand," Mrs. Pruitt said. "Someone saw the rag on it, and asked after it. I told them what I knew, which was little enough. They said to see you had something for your trouble. It was no trouble," Nell said, and meant it, and pushed the coin back into the older woman's hand, with the particular firmness of someone who would rather go hungry than be paid for a kindness that had cost her only a handkerchief and a shawl she was already glad to have given. Tell whoever asked that I would have done the same for any child in that room. It wants no thanks. Truly, it wants none at all. Mrs. Pruitt looked at her a moment longer than the matter strictly required, the way a woman looks at something she is deciding whether to say aloud, and then folded the coin away into her own apron instead of pressing the point. "As you like," she said. "Though I'll tell you, Miss Coverdale, that not everyone in this house would have refused it." "Then I am glad to be the one who did," Nell said, and went back to her copper, and thought no more of it, because she did not know that the person who had asked after the shilling was not, as she assumed, some idle guest with more coin than sense, but the master of the house himself, working through the housekeeper the way a man works, who does not wish his own hand seen in a small matter, and who had begun, without entirely admitting it to himself, to arrange his early walks so that they passed the wash-house at the hour the new laundress came in. He did not introduce himself to her. Not yet. He had a reason for that, though it was not one he examined closely in those first days, being a man who preferred to act before he explained himself, even to himself. His name, above stairs, was Julian Ferrers, 9th Duke of Calder, 35 years old only in the sense that the world counted years, and a good deal older than that in every other sense that mattered. He had inherited the title at 28 at his father's death, and with it a household of stewards and cousins and creditors who had each, in their own fashion, spent the years since teaching him that most people were kind to a duke in direct proportion to what a duke could do for them. He had been engaged once to a woman named Seraphina Cole, who had wept beautifully at the smallest provocation, and had once, when she believed herself unobserved, boxed a housemaid's ear for spilling chocolate on a hem. He had seen it by accident through a half-open door, and he had ended the engagement within the month, and had not trusted a well-dressed smile since. It was for that reason, though he would not have put it so plainly to anyone, that he had taken to walking his own grounds before dawn, dressed as a man of no consequence at all. He called himself Hale when the walking took him near enough to speak to anyone, which was not often, because a groundskeeper who spoke too much invited questions a duke could not afford to answer. He told himself he did it to see his own fences mended properly. He was beginning to suspect, this particular week, that he did it for another reason now, and that the reason had red knuckles and a basket on her hip, and had given away her only good shawl to a servant boy without once looking round to see who might be watching. He watched the wash-house a second morning, and a third, not from any plan, only because his feet took him that way, and he did not argue with them. He saw Nell Coverdale scold a boy for lifting a wet basket wrong, and then lift it herself before he could try again. He saw her give the boy the heel of her own bread at midday, when she thought the yard was empty, and eat the rest of her dinner in 4 bites because there was not much of it. He saw her stop, once in the yard, and simply stand still a long moment with her eyes shut. The particular stillness of a woman gathering herself to go back inside and be steady for someone else's sake, and he did not go to her, because he had no right yet to intrude on it, and because a duke discovered comforting a laundress in his own stable yard would raise questions that would follow her home worse than they followed him. He did, however, go to his steward that same afternoon and ask, in the mildest voice he owned, after the condition of a cottage down on the low road, the one where a laundress named Grace Coverdale lay sick, and whether the physician's account had been settled. "It has not, your Grace," the steward said. "The Coverdale woman has not the means, and has not asked for help besides." "Then send the account to me," the Duke said. Quietly, I do not wish it spoken of, and I do not wish her thanked for something she does not know I have done. Do you understand me? I do, your grace. See that you keep understanding it, the Duke said, and went back to his ledgers, and told himself that this was a small matter. A debt any decent man would settle for a sick tenant, nothing more than that. He was, by 5 o'clock, no longer entirely certain he believed himself. It was 3 days after the shilling that Nell first spoke to the man called Hale, though she did not think of it as a beginning, only as an ordinary exchange with an ordinary man in an ordinary coat, the kind she passed a dozen times a week and never troubled to remember afterward. She had gone out to the yard before light to fetch water, and found him standing at the fence line with a lantern, studying a post that did not, to her eye, look in any particular need of studying. "You're up early for fence mending," she said, because she had never learnt the trick of saying nothing when a thing occurred to her. "So are you for laundry," he said. "My mother is unwell. I'm doing her work till she's mended. That is a great deal to carry for someone else's illness." "It is her work," Nell said, as though that settled the matter, which to her it did. "I would rather carry it than watch her lose the position over a fever she never asked for. It costs me nothing that matters." He looked at her a long moment in the lantern light, the way a man looks at a sentence he intends to remember. "It costs you a great deal," he said. "You have simply decided not to count it." She had no answer ready for that, because it was true in a way she had never heard said aloud, and she did not care for the feeling of being read so plainly by a man in a groundskeeper's coat. "You talk a great deal for a man mending fences," she said to cover it. "I am told it is one of my worse habits," he said, and there was, for just a moment, something almost like a smile at the corner of his mouth, unpractised, as though the muscle for it had gone stiff from disuse. "I'll let you get to your water, Miss Coverdale. You know my name." "Mrs. Pruitt mentioned it," he said, which was true, though it was not the whole of the truth, and he did not offer the rest. She went back in with her pails, and thought no more of it than she thought of the weather, except that she found herself, the next morning, glancing toward the fence line before she quite knew she was doing it, and being obscurely disappointed when the yard was empty, and telling herself firmly that this was foolishness she had no time for. She did not know then that the man she had begun, without meaning to watch for at the fence line each dawn, was the same man who signed her mother's physician's account without his name on it, and gave the housekeeper coin for a boy's cut hand, and stood some nights at his own study window a long time, thinking about a woman who gave away her only shawl and thanked no one for noticing. It was proximity, at first, nothing more. Nell was moved, within the fortnight, from the wash-house to the linen-room proper, on Mrs. Pruitt's recommendation, because her stitching was too fine to waste on boiling water, when there were torn hems and worn cuffs enough in that great house to keep 3 women busy. It was better work, indoor work, work that let her hands stay whole through the winter, and she took it with the particular gratitude of a woman who understood exactly how easily it might have gone the other way. The linen-room had a window that looked out over the same stable yard, and it was there, mending a coat-sleeve one grey afternoon, that she saw Hale again, this time not at the fence, but at the stable door, gentling a young horse that had thrown its groom twice that week and would not be led. He did not raise his voice to it. He did not use the whip the groom had reached for. He simply stood at its shoulder a long while, saying nothing that she could hear, until the animal's ears came forward, and its head came down, and it let him lead it in as easy as a lamb. "He's good with the horses," Nell said to Mrs. Pruitt, who happened to be in the room folding sheets. "He's good with most things that don't know to be afraid of him," Mrs. Pruitt said, and did not elaborate, and went on folding, and if there was a particular weight in the way she said it, Nell did not catch it, being fully occupied at the time with a sleeve that would not lie flat. It was in the linen room, some days later, that Hale found an excuse to come in, ostensibly about a torn coat of his own, and Nell mended it while he stood by, and they talked the way two people talk who have run out of small subjects and are too careful, both of them, to reach for large ones. "You mend as though the tear offends you personally," he said. "It does," she said. "A thing that's whole should stay whole as long as it can be made to. It isn't so very much to ask of the world, and when it can't be helped, when the thing is torn past mending, then you don't pretend it isn't," Nell said. "You say so plainly, and you find what use it still has, and you don't waste grief on it past what's needed. My mother taught me that. She had a great deal of practice. That is a hard philosophy for so young a woman. It is the only one I've been given the chance to test," she said, and bit the thread, and did not look up, because there was something in his face when she said it that she did not entirely want to see. Something that looked, absurdly, like a man being told a thing he needed to hear, and had not expected to hear it from a woman patching his sleeve. He did not tell her, that afternoon, who he was. He told himself there would be a better time, a safer time, a time when the telling would not undo whatever this quiet, unguarded thing between them had become. He did not examine too closely why he wanted it to last a little longer before it changed. He only knew that Nell Coverdale spoke to Hale the groundskeeper in a way she would never speak to the Duke of Calder, without care for what he thought of her, without the small bend in the spine that rank puts into every other conversation he had ever had in his own house, and he had discovered, somewhere in the space of a fortnight, that he wanted very badly to go on being spoken to that way. The frost had not yet broken when Lady Cassandra Vane came to Calder Hall, and with her the particular cold that has nothing to do with weather at all. Lady Cassandra was the Duke's cousin on his father's side, a woman of considerable beauty and a laugh she had practised until it fell in 3 neat identical beats, like a bell struck by someone who had learned exactly where to strike it. She had come, ostensibly, to see the Duke through the dull season, and had brought with her the settled expectation, shared by half her family and never once by the Duke himself, that she and Julian would in time make a sensible match of it, uniting 2 branches of a family that had never much cared for each other, except when property was at stake. She did not know about Hale, because nobody above stairs knew about Hale, but she knew about laundresses and linen maids the way she knew about weather, as a fact of life to be tolerated and, where possible, improved upon by being made to feel their place. She found Nell in the linen room on her second day, going through a chest of gloves that wanted mending before the spring assemblies, and she watched a long moment before she spoke, the way a cat watches before it decides a thing is worth batting. "You're the one who does the fine work," Cassandra said. "The housekeeper mentioned you. Coverdale, is it?" "Yes, my lady." "Well, we shall see." She said nothing further that day, but the seed of it had been planted, and Nell, who had survived worse than a cool word from a fine lady, thought little more of it than she thought of the frost outside the window, which was also cold, and also, in its way, expected. It was at the spring assembly, held early that year by the Duke's own decision, though nobody below stairs understood why, that Cassandra chose her moment, and chose it in front of a room full of witnesses, which was, Nell would later understand, precisely the point of choosing it there at all. A glove had torn at the seam, one of Cassandra's own fine kid leather gone at the second finger, and rather than send it below stairs in the ordinary way, Cassandra had it brought out and set before Nell in the withdrawing room itself, in front of a dozen guests taking their tea, and asked, in a voice pitched to carry, that the mending be done there and then. "On your knees, if you please," Cassandra said. "I should like to see how it's managed. I understand you're very skilled." The room went the particular quiet of people deciding whether to be embarrassed on someone else's behalf. Nell felt the heat come up into her face and willed it down again, because she had long ago decided that a blush given away was a blush that could be used against her. She did not curtsy. She did not plead a headache or an urgent errand below stairs, though both would have been believed. She took the glove, and she knelt, because kneeling to mend a glove was, after all, only kneeling, and it cost her nothing she had not already given up 100 times in that house, and she would not let Cassandra see that it cost her anything at all. "You do this very prettily," Cassandra said, watching the needle. "One might almost think you'd had practice being looked down on." "I have had a great deal of practice," my lady Nell said, not looking up. "It is a useful thing to be good at. One never knows when it will be wanted of one again." A ripple went through the room, the smallest laugh quickly smothered, because it had landed exactly where Nell had not entirely meant it to land, on the pompous edge of the moment itself, and Cassandra's bell laugh did not come this time. Not its full 3 beats, only a thin single note before she thought better of it. "You're very free with your tongue for a laundress," Cassandra said. "I am a mender, my lady," Nell said, tying off the thread with the same care she gave every seam, whole or torn, rich cloth or poor. "My tongue is my own business. The glove, I think, is done." She handed it back finished, invisible where it had torn, and rose from her knees without haste, and it was at that exact moment that the Duke of Calder came into the room, having heard, from a footman moving faster than a footman ought, that his cousin had a servant on her knees in front of his guests. He did not raise his voice. He rarely did, it was, Nell would learn, one of the more frightening things about him, that he never needed to. "That is enough," he said, 2 words, absolute as a closed door, and the room went entirely still. Miss Coverdale mends where mending is asked. She does not kneel for sport. "I'll thank you to remember whose house you are a guest in, Cassandra, and whose servant you have just entertained yourself at the expense of." Cassandra's composure did not crack, quite, but something moved behind her eyes that had not been there before, something that filed the moment away for later use. "I meant no harm, Julian," she said. "I only wished to see the work done well." "Then you have seen it," the Duke said, "and you may consider the lesson concluded." He did not look at Nell as he said it, not directly, not in a way any guest in that room could have called particular, but she felt for one unguarded second the full weight of his attention pass over her like warmth from a fire she had not known was lit, and then it was gone, and he had turned to some other guest, and the ordinary noise of the room closed back over the moment as if it had never happened at all. Nell went below stairs with the mended glove, and did not cry, not there, not where anyone could see it, and told herself, walking the cold passage back to the linen room, that a duke's 2 words in her defence meant nothing more than any decent master owed any decent servant, and that she would be a fool to let it mean more than that to her. She was not entirely successful in the telling. Cassandra did not forgive the single laugh she had lost in that room, and a woman like Cassandra Vane did not need much more than that to begin building a case against someone she had already decided to dislike. It began quietly, the way such things always begin, a remark, dropped at breakfast, about how odd it was that a certain groundskeeper seemed to keep such very particular hours near the linen room. A question to a housemaid, idly put, about whether Miss Coverdale ever met anyone before the house was properly awake. Cassandra had seen Hale and Nell together only once by chance, from an upper window, two figures standing close in a grey dawn, with their heads bent toward each other, in a way that meant nothing at all, and could, with the right telling, be made to mean a great deal. She did not go to the Duke with it. She was cleverer than that. She went, instead, to Mrs. Pruitt, in the particular tone of a woman doing her Christian duty, however unpleasant, and suggested that a servant seen meeting a man alone before dawn, whatever the man's station, was a servant whose reputation could not survive the telling, and that perhaps, for the girl's own good and the house's, something ought to be said. Mrs. Pruitt, who understood a great deal more than Cassandra credited her with, said only that she would look into it, and went instead directly to find Nell, not to accuse her but to warn her, because Mrs. Pruitt had kept enough secrets in that house to know exactly how fast a small true thing could be turned into a large false one, once Cassandra Vane had her hands on it. "She means to have you dismissed, Mrs." Pruitt said, without preamble, finding Nell in the linen room folding the day's mending, or worse than dismissed. Talked about, in a way that follows a girl home, and follows her mother too, and follows a sick woman who cannot afford to lose the little standing she has left in this village. Nell's hands went still over the cloth. "For what? I have done nothing that wants hiding. You have been seen with a man before light more than once," Mrs. Pruitt said. "I know it is nothing. I know what sort of nothing it is, better than you think I do. But knowing and proving are different animals, and Lady Cassandra does not deal in proof. She deals in what people are willing to believe." Nell thought of her mother, still weak from the fever, still needing every shilling the household sent her way. She thought of Tam, whose place in that house depended on nobody above stairs deciding the servants below were more trouble than they were worth. She thought, longer than she wanted to admit, of a man in a groundskeeper's coat who talked to her as though her thoughts were worth the trouble of hearing, and of how little it would take to lose even that. She did not weep. She had trained herself long past weeping where it showed. "Then I will stop meeting him," she said, "and I will leave before she has the chance to make good on the rest of it. I would rather go quietly than watch my mother suffer for a friendship that was never anything to be ashamed of, and that I will not let be made shameful by someone else's telling. Nell, I have made up my mind, Mrs. Pruitt. Please don't try to unmake it. I haven't the strength left to argue, only to act." She wrote Hale a note that night, brief, plain. The kind of note a woman writes when she has decided that kindness to herself means cutting a thing off before it can be used against her. "I must stop our mornings at the fence. I am grateful for them. I will not pretend otherwise. But I have people who depend on my good name, and I cannot spend it, however small the spending seems to you and me alone. Do not think ill of me for going quietly. It is the only going I have left that I can still choose for myself." She left it where she knew he would find it, and 2 days later, without telling Mrs. Pruitt where she meant to go, she packed what little she owned, took her mother from the cottage on the low road, and removed to a village 3 hours off, where a cousin of her mother's kept a small house and had room, barely, for 2 more. She did not say goodbye to Tam. because she could not trust herself to do it without breaking something in her own resolve, and she left the mended shawl, washed and folded, on the boot-room shelf where he would find it, with no note at all, because some kindnesses, she had decided, spoke better for saying nothing. The Duke of Calder read Nell's note standing in the stable yard in his groundskeeper's coat, and for the first time in some years he did not know what to do with his own hands. He had gone to the fence line that morning, expecting the ordinary thing, the small exchange that had become, without his quite noticing when, the best part of his day, and had found instead a folded paper tucked under a stone, and Mrs. Pruitt's face, when he sought her out afterward, told him the rest before she said a word. "She's gone, Your Grace, Mrs." Pruitt said. She had never called him Hale, not once, not even when he asked her to, because Mrs. Pruitt had kept his secrets a long while, and had earned the right to call him whatever she pleased in private, took her mother and went to a cousin 3 hours off. Lady Cassandra had been making noises about her reputation. The girl chose to go before the noises became something worse. Cassandra, the Duke said, and the single word carried more weight than a longer sentence would have managed. She did nothing you can call her to account for outright, Mrs. Pruitt said. She never does. She only makes the ground unsafe to stand on, and lets other people do the falling. The Duke stood a long moment in the cold yard, turning the folded note over in his hands, and thought of every reason he had given himself for waiting to tell Nell who he truly was, and found, examining them now in the particular clarity that comes only after a loss, that none of them amounted to anything better than cowardice dressed as patience. "Tell me what you know of the doctor's account for her mother," he said finally. "Settled in full, Your Grace, same as you asked, though the girl never learnt it was your hand behind it. And the boy. Tam, he's to go to the trade school in Aldermore come spring, apprentice to a wheelwright who's agreed to take him on. Board and all found. That was your doing too, though I doubt he knows the whole of who arranged it either." "Good," the Duke said. "Good, none of that changes now. See that it doesn't, whatever else happens. And Miss Coverdale, Your Grace, will you go after her?" He did not answer that at once. He looked out across the yard toward the fence line, where he had stood so many mornings watching for a woman with red knuckles and a basket on her hip, and thought of Seraphina Cole's pretty tears and the housemaid's boxed ear, and thought of Nell Coverdale on her knees in his own withdrawing-room, mending a glove with more dignity than half the peerage he had ever entertained under that roof, and refusing, in the same breath, to let anyone make her ashamed of the work her hands were built for. "Yes," he said, "I will go after her, but I will not go as Hale, and I will not go pretending any longer to be a man I am not. She is owed the truth before she is owed anything else from me, whatever it costs me to give it." Mrs. Pruitt allowed herself, for the first time in the conversation, something close to a smile. "It is about time, Your Grace," she said. "If you'll forgive my saying so." "I will forgive it," the Duke said, "seeing as you are, as usual, entirely right." It took him the better part of 2 days to settle what needed settling before he could leave Calder Hall, and in that time Lady Cassandra, sensing the ground shifting under her without yet understanding why, made the mistake of pressing her advantage where it did not belong. "I hear the Coverdale girl has removed herself," she said to him over breakfast, with the particular lightness of a woman who believes she has already won. Sensible of her, in the end. These things are always simpler when the lower party understands her place without being told twice. The Duke set down his cup with a care that was, in its own way, more frightening than any raised voice could have been. "I would have a word with you, Cassandra, and I would have it now, and I would have it be the last such word I ever need to have." She had not, until that moment, seen the particular stillness in his face that meant the conversation had already been decided before it began. "Julian, I only meant, I know precisely what you meant," he said. "You meant to make a good woman's honest name into a weapon, because she declined to be diminished by you in front of witnesses, and because a laundress with more dignity than you possess offended something in you that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with pride. I will not pretend to misunderstand you further. You will leave for your aunt's house in Bath within the week. I will write ahead to explain the change of air is for your health, and you will not correct that account in front of anyone who matters, and you will not so much as send a letter to Aldermore without my knowledge for as long as I have breath to prevent it. Do we understand each other? You would exile me over a servant. I would exile you," the Duke said, "over cruelty dressed as manners, which I have had entirely enough of in my own family to last several lifetimes. The servant, as you call her, is the only person in this house who has ever asked nothing of me at all. That, cousin, is worth considerably more to me than your comfort." He left the following morning, in his own carriage, in his own clothes, as the Duke of Calder and no one else, and the drive to the small village 3 hours off gave him ample time to compose what he meant to say, none of which, in the end, survived contact with the moment itself. Nell was in the garden of her mother's cousin's cottage, hanging washing in a thin grey light, not so different from the light at Calder Hall, when the carriage came up the lane, and she knew before she saw his face that something in her ordinary life had ended, because carriages like that one did not come up lanes like this one for anybody she knew. He came into the small garden on foot, having left the carriage at the gate, and he had not worn the groundskeeper's coat, and she understood, looking at him, a full second before he spoke, exactly what she was looking at, and something in her chest went very still and very cold and very clear all at once. "You," she said. "Yes," he said. "Me, Julian Ferrers, Duke of Calder, and also, for what it is worth to you now, the man you knew as Hale, though I begin to think that was never entirely a different man at all, only the same man with less to lose by being honest." She did not sit down, though her legs would have been glad of it. She stood very straight among the drying linen and said nothing, which was, of everything she might have done, the thing that frightened him most. "You lied to me," she said finally. "Every morning, every fence post. You let me talk to you as though you were nobody, and you were the man who could have ended Cassandra's cruelty with a single word from the start, and instead you let me kneel. I did not know that first day what I would become to you," he said. "By the time I knew, I had already let the lie run too long to end it easily, and I was a coward about the ending of it, which is the plain truth, and I will not dress it in anything softer. I am here to be honest with you now, in full, whatever it costs me, because you deserve the whole of it before you decide anything else about me." "Then, be honest," Nell said. "Why? Why any of it? Why does a duke stand at a fence line before light pretending to be a groundskeeper?" He was quiet a long moment, the kind of quiet a man takes before he says the truest thing he owns. "Because I wanted to see what a person did when they believed no one of consequence was watching," he said. "I had been engaged once to a woman who wept beautifully in company and struck a servant when she thought herself unseen, and I had learned, at considerable cost, that manners in a drawing-room tell you nothing true about a person's character. I began walking my own grounds in disguise, because I no longer trusted what people showed a duke. I wanted to see what they were when they thought a duke could not see them at all. I did not expect, when I began it, to find a woman kneeling on a cold floor, giving away her only shawl to a servant boy with a cut hand, wanting nothing for it, not even his thanks. I did not expect that woman to go on being exactly that same person every single morning after, with no audience, with nothing to gain, simply because it was who she was. I wanted to see who you were when you did not know I was watching. That is the only test that ever tells the truth. You passed it before I had even properly introduced myself to you, and I have been unable to stop watching for you ever since. Nell's hands at her sides were not steady, though she willed them to be. You tested me, she said, as though I were a horse you meant to buy. No, he said, and there was something almost fierce in the flatness of it. I did not test you to decide whether you were worth having. I watched you because I could not stop myself, and only afterward understood what I had been given the chance to see. There is a difference, Nell, though I grant you it is a difference I explained poorly, and far too late. She turned from him then, back to the washing, because she needed somewhere to put her hands and her eyes both, and hung a shirt with more care than the moment strictly required. You let your cousin humiliate me in front of a room full of guests, she said, to the linen, not to him. I stopped her the moment I understood what was happening, he said. I would have stopped her sooner, had I known sooner. I have sent her from my house for it, and she will not return while I have any say in the matter, which, as it is my house, is considerable say indeed. And the doctor's account. The boy's apprenticeship. Was that you as well? It was, he said. I asked that you never be told, not because I wished to hide my hand from you specifically, but because I have never believed a kindness worth much once it comes attached to a name that expects gratitude for it. I did not want your thanks. I wanted your mother well, and the boy safe. That is the whole of my reasoning, such as it is. Nell set down the shirt at last, and turned to face him fully, and her eyes, when they met his, were dry, because she had trained them long ago not to give her away. But something in her voice, when she spoke, had lost its earlier flatness. You might have told me from the start, she said. All of it would have been simpler. It would have been simpler, he agreed. It would also have been false. You never once, in all our mornings at that fence, spoke to me as anything but hail. I have not, in 35 years, had a single honest conversation with a person who did not know what my name was worth before they opened their mouth to me. I did not tell you because I was afraid that the moment you knew, you would begin, without meaning to, speaking to the Duke instead of to me. I am telling you now, because I would rather have the truth cost me you than keep a lie that kept you only halfway. She was quiet a long while, and the frost, thinner here than at Calder Hall but present all the same, sat white along the fence at the bottom of the garden, and somewhere a rook called once and was answered by nothing at all. I don't know what you want from me, Nell said finally. You are a duke. I mend gloves for a living, when I am not scrubbing linen. Whatever this has been, it cannot be what you are asking me to think it could be. I am not asking you to think anything tonight, he said. I have not come to press you for an answer you are not ready to give. I will ask you again in the spring, when the frost is off the ground and you have had time to decide. Without me standing in your garden confusing the matter, whether the man you knew at that fence was worth knowing after all. I would rather have your honest no in the spring than a yes tonight that you gave only because I arrived in a fine carriage and made you feel you owed me something for it. You owe me nothing, Nell. That is the one thing I came to be certain you understood, and if my answer is no, then it will be no, he said, and I will have lost nothing I was ever entitled to in the first place, only something I had hoped for without earning it. I would rather have your no, freely given, than a yes you felt you must give me. That is not a fine sentiment I have prepared for effect. It is simply the truth, and I have grown very tired, this last fortnight, of offering you anything less than that. He left before dark, without pressing her hand, without asking leave to write, and the carriage went back down the lane the way it had come, and Nell stood a long while in the cold garden among the drying linen, and did not cry, though for the first time in a great many years she thought perhaps she might have been permitted to. Winter loosened its hold slowly, the way it always does in a village 3 hours from anywhere grand, and Nell Coverdale had a great deal of time, in the weeks that followed, to turn the Duke's confession over in her mind, the way she turned a torn seam, looking for where exactly it had given way, and whether it could be trusted to hold if mended. Her mother mended too, in body if not entirely in temper, strong enough by the first thaw to sit up by the fire, and take an interest in gossip carried down from Calder Hall by a carter, who still made the run twice a month. It was from him that Nell learned in pieces what Mrs. Pruitt had apparently made no particular effort to keep quiet, that Lady Cassandra Vane had gone to Bath and, by most accounts, would not be returning, that Tam Bewley had begun his apprenticeship with the wheelwright, and was, by all reports, thriving, having grown 2 inches and lost none of his cheek, that the Duke of Calder had, in the weeks since Nell's departure, done something almost unheard of for a man of his rank, which was to quietly settle a chain of debts and accounts across half the village. Of Aldermore, none of them attached to his name, all of them traced back, eventually, by people with nothing better to do than trace such things, to the same source. He paid the widow Hargrove's rent through the whole of the winter, the carter told her, not knowing, of course, what the name meant to the woman listening, and sent boots round to the almshouse children, no note with them at all, and settled Farmer Dinsmore's account at the mill when the harvest failed. Nobody's meant to know it's him. But there's not much stays secret in a village that size, not forever. Nell listened to all of it with her hands still in her lap and her needle idle, and thought of a man standing at a fence line in a groundskeeper's coat, watching, wanting nothing back, and understood, with the particular clarity of a person finally seeing a whole pattern after handling only its threads, that the kindness she had performed without an audience had been met, all along, by a kindness, performed the very same way. "You've gone quiet," her mother said from the fireside. "You've had that look on you a fortnight now." "Have I?" "You have. It's the look you get when you're deciding something and haven't yet told yourself you've decided it." Nell did not answer that directly, but she took up the mending again, and her mother, who had raised her and knew better than to press a Coverdale before a Coverdale was ready, let the silence stand. Spring came properly in the first week of the new month, the frost going out of the ground all at once the way it sometimes does, and with it came a letter, not from the Duke, but from Mrs. Pruitt, brief and plainly worded, asking only whether Miss Coverdale might consider returning to Calder Hall, as the linen-room missed her particular hand and the household generally, was the poorer for her absence, and adding, in a line at the very bottom that Nell read 4 times before she was satisfied she had read it correctly, that a certain party had asked nothing of her at all in the matter, and would not, whatever she chose, but that a certain party had also not once, in the whole of the winter, stopped watching the road. Nell wrote back that she would come, for her own reasons, to see Tam and to see whether the position still wanted filling, and told herself firmly that this was the whole of her reasoning, and knew, even as she sealed the letter, that it was not. She arrived at Calder Hall on an ordinary grey morning, much like the one on which she had first come. Though the frost was gone now, and the smell in the yard was turned earth and new grass instead of wood smoke and standing cold, and Tam Bewley, taller than she remembered, and walking with rather less of a limp than the wheelwright's work apparently required of him, was the first to see her at the gate, and came running across the yard without a shred of the composure a proper apprentice was meant to have. "You came back," he said. "I kept the shawl. I never wore it out, I promise you. I only wore it when it was proper cold." "I'm glad of it," Nell said, and found, to her own surprise, that her voice was not entirely steady, and did not much mind that it wasn't. She found Mrs. Pruitt in the linen room, exactly where she had left her, and the older woman looked at her a long moment, and then, unusually for her, said nothing clever at all, only crossed the room and took both Nell's hands in her own, red knuckles and all, and held them a moment before letting go. "He's in the study," Mrs. Pruitt said. "He has been in that study a great many mornings this winter, staring at a fence line he has no further excuse to walk out to, seeing as the person he used to walk out for had gone. I'll not tell you what to do, Miss Coverdale. I'll only say that a man who keeps his word about not pressing you is not the same as a man who has stopped hoping you'll come to him of your own accord." Nell found him in the study, as promised, standing at the window with his back to the door, and he turned when he heard her, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all, because there did not seem to be a sentence small enough to begin with after a winter like the one they had both had. "You came back," he said finally, echoing Tam without knowing it. "I came to see the boy," Nell said, "and to see whether the linen room still wanted a mender." "It does," he said. "It always did." That was never in question. "No," she agreed. "I don't suppose it was." She crossed the room and stood before him, close enough now that she could see the tiredness in his face had not entirely lifted over the winter, and closer still than she had ever stood to him as Hale at any fence line, and she found that she was no longer entirely certain which name belonged to the man in front of her, and understood, in the same instant, that it no longer mattered, because they had become, somewhere in the space of a season, the very same man to her. "I have thought a great deal, this winter," she said, "about what it means that you watched me before you knew me, and loved, or began to love, whatever it was you saw. I have wondered whether a woman like me could ever be anything to a man like you besides a story he tells himself about his own good judgment. I have decided, in the end, that I don't much care what the answer to that would look like from the outside. I only care whether it's true from where I am standing. And I find that it is." "Then say what you mean to say," he said, very quietly, "and I will not press you for a single word more than that." "I love you," Nell said plainly, the way she said everything, without ornament, because ornament had never once been necessary between them, and she saw no reason to invent it now. Not the Duke, not the fine carriage, or the settled accounts, or the 2 words that silenced your cousin in front of a room full of people, though I will admit that last one did a great deal of good in my estimation at the time. I love the man who stood at a fence and told me the truth about a tear that couldn't be mended, and who let me speak to him as though he were nobody, because that was, I think, the only way either of us ever learned to trust the other. "Nell, but I will not be married to a lie kept quiet a second time," she said before he could answer, however honestly meant. "I will be spoken to plainly, always, whatever the cost of the plain speaking. I will be lied to by omission exactly once more in this life, and it will not be by you. Or I will walk out that door and not come back a second time, however grand the carriage that comes after me. You have my word, he said, on every count. I have had quite enough this winter of being a man who hides things from the person he loves. I did not care for the man I was, those mornings at the fence, half honest and calling it kindness. I would rather be fully known and less admired than concealed and safe. That is not a sentence I say lightly. Then that is all I ask, Nell said, and for the first time since the boot-room floor and the ruined handkerchief and the shawl given without thanks, she let herself smile fully, the way she had not smiled in longer than she could easily remember. He took her hand then, bare, because she had never owned a great many gloves, and wore none that day, and he drew off his own glove, finger by finger. Slowly, without hurry, the way a man does a thing he has waited a long time to be permitted, and pressed his bare palm to hers, and neither of them said anything more for a long moment, because there did not seem to be anything left worth saying that their hands had not already said better. "Marry me," he said finally. "Not because I rescued anyone, and not because a duke asking makes it wise. Marry me, because you are the only person who has ever spoken to me as though my name were the least interesting thing about me, and because I would rather spend the whole of my life being plainly known by you than admired at a distance by anyone else in this county." "Yes," Nell said. It was the only word she needed. They were married that summer, quietly, in the small stone church at Aldermore, with Grace Coverdale seated in the front pew in a new shawl she had not asked for and could not stop touching, and Tam Bewley standing straighter than any apprentice had a right to, and Mrs. Pruitt weeping without the least shame into a handkerchief she had, in a fit of private sentiment, hemmed herself. It was, by the standards of a dukedom, a small wedding. It was, by every standard that mattered to the two people standing at the front of it, exactly large enough. A year later, in a winter grown mild by comparison with the one that had begun it all, Nell sat by the fire in the study that had once belonged to the Duke alone, and now belonged, in every way that counted, to them both, and drew her husband's bare hand into her own, and did not let go of it, and he did not let go of hers. The frost had come again outside, thin along the fence line where he no longer needed to walk in disguise, because there was nothing left in that house he needed to test, and nothing left he needed to hide. Tam had written that week from the wheelwrights, proud and badly spelled and entirely happy, to say he had finished his first cartwheel unsupervised, and it had not, contrary to Mr. Grix's old predictions, fallen apart. Grace Coverdale kept a cottage on the estate now, close enough to visit daily, far enough to keep her own hearth, and wanted for nothing that mattered. Lady Cassandra Vane remained in Bath, and had sent, that autumn, a letter addressed to the Duke that Mrs. Pruitt had burned unread on his instruction, on the grounds that a woman who had tried to burn a good name deserved no better courtesy in return. There was a pair of gloves in nearly every room of Calder Hall that winter, plain wool, fine kid, small enough for a growing boy, worn enough for an old woman's hands, because Nell Coverdale, Duchess of Calder now in name though never once in manner, had never quite lost the habit of mending what could still be saved, and giving away what she no longer needed, and had found, in her new position, considerably more of both to go round. "You are thinking about the boot-room," Julian said, watching her face in the firelight, because he had learned over the year to read the particular stillness that came over her when her mind went back to that first cold morning. "I am thinking," Nell said, "that I never once looked round to see who was watching. It never occurred to me that anyone would be. That," he said, "was the entire reason it told me the truth. Outside, a rook called once into the settling dark, and was not answered, and the fire held steady against the frost the way it always had, the way it always would, and the two of them sat on, hands joined and unhurried, needing no more words for it than that. A kindness given to someone who cannot repay it is the only kindness that ever tells the truth about the one who gives it."